Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was a conflict between the communist regime of North Vietnam and the Southern allies, the Viet Cong, versus mainly South Vietnam and the US. The lead-up. The Vietnam War started in late 1950s and lasted until 1975. It was a Cold War conflict pitting South Vietnam and the US and its allies against the communist regime of North Vietnam and its southern allies, the Viet Cong. The main reason for the war was that the US at this time in history were truly afraid of the dissemination of the communist ideology. So with the continuous conflict between the communist North and the democratic South Vietnam, the US naturally decided to intervene and support the democratic South.
The war. One of the main traits of this long war between North Vietnam and the two allies, South Vietnam and the US, was the guerrilla warfare, which is a form of irregular warfare in which a small group of combatants, such as paramilitary personnel, armed civilians, or irregulars, use military tactics, including ambushes, sabotage, and raids. The North Vietnam used this tactic to ambush towns and villages in the south, while also using it to murder South Vietnamese generals. While the communists in the north are acting out this warfare, a sympathizing group in the south called the Viet Cong also begins to fight over their communist views and opinions. This was also a problem for the US, who are trying to stabilize the country and trying to contain the communism. A lot of ambushes and hit and runs were acted out by the Viet Cong against the US Army. The Americans felt the need to do something that could expose their roads and trails. The thing they used was a defoliant called Agent Orange that came in metal containers. This dangerous chemical removed the leaves from all trees, which made it easy to expose trails. A lot of innocent civilians died of this chemical, which also has an effect on today's population of South Vietnam due to passed on genes. The war goes on while the North and the South try to kill one another off. At last, the North takes an aim at Saigon, which is the biggest city in the South. Saigon then falls to the power of the communists, and the Americans realize that their mission has failed.
As the war continued, more people were drafted and more deaths ensued. Protests occurred mainly on college campuses and in major cities at first, but in 1965, after the United States began bombing North Vietnam, protests could be seen all across the country. The protests and the anti-war marches attracted a lot of support, peaking in 1968 after one of North Vietnam's largest military campaigns, Tet Offensive, made it clear that the end of the war was nowhere near in sight. The end of the war. In 1969, President Nixon declares at a news conference that the Vietnam War is coming to an end. Following a new program termed Vietnamization, the Nixon administration had planned for the South Vietnamese forces to be built up in such a way that they could take up gradually more responsibility alongside the US pulling their own forces and troops out of Vietnam. Declaring the war to be over at this point proved to be a premature statement, as Nixon continued to order military strikes and attacks on key communist sanctuaries with US forces. Nixon did, though, continue to decrease the number of American soldiers deployed in South Vietnam, although the fighting was still ongoing. In January 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed and the US completely withdrew their forces. After this fighting kept going until 1975, when Saigon, which is the largest city in Vietnam, fell to the communists.